Can you think of a fighter that's been more written off than Dricus Du Plessis going into a pivotal matchup? This wasn't a popular booking for many reasons, but what was the biggest fumble here in that fight booking? Because a lot has been said, guys, over why this happened. In fact, I think on previous spinning back clicks, we all kept thinking it would fall apart and not happen just because Izzy warmed up to it eventually. All right, going first on this one, I believe, is Para.
Well, I mean, it was Chael Sonnen, I think, that said, let's just scrap this matchup. First of all, kudos to
That's
Robert
right.
Whittaker. Kudos for Robert Whittaker for taking this fight. I talk about a lot of guys who are in the upper echelon division that don't really like to give a chance for rising contenders. If you look at Dricus's resume, he's finishing fights, I think, minus Brad Tavares. It makes sense for him to get the step up in competition. So I'm not that mad. I think it's a matter of just Whittaker is so good and he's kind of beaten everybody. I think he's beaten everybody outside of Israel Adesanya at middleweight. So I'm not entirely mad. We've seen worse. We've seen guys who have gotten opportunities off of much less than what Dricus Du Plessis has done. I mean, he's finished Darren Till and Derek Brunson. Brunson's a perennial contender. He's a guy that a lot of people have gotten big opportunities off of beating. So I'm not that mad at the situation. It's just timing wise, it just didn't fall into place because Adesanya wants to fight in Sydney. He needs fresh blood. That's what he's been harping on about time and time again. Alex Pereira came as a nice gift in the sense of the storyline, the name. He got to have this amazing chapter of his career with Alex Pereira, who came from kickboxing, but he's looking for fresh blood. And if Dricus Du Plessis can beat Robert Whittaker, there's no argument that he shouldn't get it just because Whittaker is that damn good. So yeah, did they fumble? Maybe a little bit because if Whittaker wins, then you've got that or Sean Strickland as options. And Adesanya just doesn't seem that motivated to fight Whittaker. Whittaker believes he won the rematch and he believes that he can beat Adesanya in a trilogy. Adesanya's just not getting that excited. But Adesanya, credit to him, he's fought the next man up throughout his career. He's been one of those champions. He fought Marvin Vettori. I'm sure he wasn't that motivated to rematch Marvin Vettori either, but he fought Marvin Vettori, fought Jared Cannonier. He's been a very active champion. And I think there's a storyline there as well. They're going to fight in Sydney if Whittaker wins. But again, it's all a timing game, in my opinion. Du Plessis doing all the right things. Can't fault him. There's a storyline there with Israel Adesanya. He just had no surgery. He's saying, I'm going to be completely different when it comes to my cardio because that's been his biggest knock. He's a finisher. Again, outside of Brad Tavares, he's finished pretty much everybody. Let's see. I'm excited to see the way it plays out. I don't know if you even asked who I'm picking, but I am picking Whittaker. But, I don't see Du Plessis as like this unworthy challenger for Whittaker at all, is what I'm trying to say.
Got it. All right. So it goes. You know how it goes. This fight, nobody wanted it, but we're here and we're going to enjoy it one way or another. So, but I still want to know, what do you think was the biggest fumble here? Should they have reserved the two Africans for Africa, where they're building a PI, where they're saying they want to have a fight card at some point? Is it too soon to Sydney? Where it's not going to make sense, and maybe Strickland does become that bailout for Izzy, fresh matchup as well. What do you think was the biggest fumble here?
Well, to answer your first question, I think I don't remember a lot of people having Juliana Pena betting slips the night she fought Amanda Nunes, right? So that one probably to me is more of somebody getting counted out. In this particular fight, I mean, I think the biggest fumble was just boxing themselves into that fight. Possibly Robert Whittaker again fighting Israel Adesanya. Like we kind of alluded to this earlier in the show, rematches, and to get into a third one. Don't forget, like there is a possibility. I can't remember who said it in the chat, but somebody said they think Robert Whittaker would win, and it's not out of this world. Robert Whittaker is a fantastic fighter, and he's given Israel Adesanya trouble in some of the fights. He could win, and then what? We got to see this a fourth time. I mean, and what if he wins again? Are we gonna have to see it a fifth time? Like, dude, this can get out of control. I don't know why the UFC fumbled the ball. At the same time, I mean, this isn't their first rodeo. They know what they're doing. There's got to be some kind of reason that makes sense. I just wish they would come out and say it so that we would all shut up. Because for us, outside looking in, this doesn't really make a lot of sense. There are different avenues that we could have had this all play out, and I think the fans would have been happy with it. But the possibility of seeing them fight a third time kind of soon, it just feels like it wasn't that long ago that they fought. I think that was the biggest fumble.
All right. How about you, Danny? What was the biggest fumble in this whole mess at middleweight?
Yeah, just the fact that they didn't make Dricus Du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya, that is one of the biggest fumbles this year, right? Probably the
Mhm.
biggest, obviously, John Jones and Ghana, right? No doubt about that. But this has to be top five. I don't have a list, but I would assume it has to be there because it was just so obvious. I mean, you got bad blood, you got beef between the champion and Du Plessis, you got a storyline, you got two people from Africa where you can, host an event or at least make it like a theme, right? Like we see the September 16th show for Mexican Independence Day. It's going to be in Vegas, not going to be in Mexico, but still they're honoring Mexico and making the card Mexican theme and doing it on a Mexican date. They could have done that the same thing maybe for something with surrounding Africa. I'm not very familiar with holidays and whatnot, but they could have made it an African theme card with other African fighters. And again, Israel Adesanya was ready to come back after his last title defense. He's like, "Yo, put me in July. Like I'm ready to go back in there. I'm down to be active." This fight was a no-brainer. But yet again, the UFC are putting themselves in a position where Whittaker might just be the most deserving guy again. And for me personally, I would love to see that fight. It was very close the last time out. And I do think that Whittaker has a chance, believe it or not, even though he's 0-2 against the champion, to dethroning Israel Adesanya. But that's me personally. I've seen online a lot of fatigue about just instant rematches and these fights, going back to back. So I can see them having a tough time maybe selling that fight for a third time when that could have been easily avoidable, or at least they could have put a buffer long enough to whereas that fight maybe, in 6 more months or maybe a year would have seemed a little bit more fresh or a little bit more sense. Whereas this, it kind of seems like, again, they're putting themselves in a situation that they didn't have to be in. So yeah, that's the biggest fumble of them all. Dricus Du Plessis versus Adesanya was a no-brainer from any angle that you want to look at it.
I've watched a lot of sports in my life. Father, this comes to you, all right? You basically live in the continent of Africa. You have relatives on both sides of it. The World Cup was in 2010. Nigeria sends athletes to the NBA, the NFL, the EPL, English Premier League, and so do many other countries. And there's proper football leagues in all these places, which tells me there's stadiums. And of course, if you're building stadiums, you're building arenas. What do you think? Why isn't this fight happening in Africa? Like, what's the holdup that you might have heard or that we're all missing here?
I don't know if I've heard something specifically, but if you go back to the 2010 World Cup for football or soccer, the only two countries that got votes to host the World Cup were South Africa and Morocco. So obviously, my bias will always want the UFC to come to Morocco. It just doesn't particularly make sense when you look at the roster. So I'd understand why the UFC wouldn't go there. But South Africa, on the other hand, considering that Dricus is from there, and EFC, obviously the organization is there. But regardless of the country, whether it's Nigeria or Cameroon or wherever the UFC wants to go, they just got to build the infrastructure. Like you said, I mean, it's a matter of investing, that country investing in that and being interested to host that event. Now, if Dricus emerges and beats Robert Whittaker, and then we could be parties from there could be talking about wanting to make an event over there. I don't know where the UFC wants to go because you want to cater to the champion, I guess, with Israel and go to Nigeria. But I don't know if Nigeria can host that. I know Kamaru Usman has an MMA league there, I believe. But I'm not sure if they're ready to host a UFC event. So that's the thing. It's a lot of questions. I know the UFC are working on it. But I don't think, I mean, Adesanya wants to fight in Sydney right now. So I don't think this fight's going to happen after. There isn't enough time to make it happen. You would have to wait until next year and start planning for it specifically. So regardless, I think we're going to get robbed of that moment of us seeing it in Africa. Maybe down the line they could do something. But I wanted to make another point in terms of, I feel if Du Plessis got the title shot against Adesanya, here's the thing, because you'll get a lot of people who are going to be like, well, he doesn't deserve it, yada, yada, yada. But the fight against Robert Whittaker, in my eyes, it's undeniable if he beats him. It's just risky because if he loses that fight, then it's kind of like a back of the line type of situation. But that's why Sean Strickland winning this past weekend was best case scenario for the UFC, because here's their plan B. So that's the way I look at it. But yeah, right now I don't see UFC Africa, that narrative, especially between Adesanya and Du Plessis. We're just not going to see it play out the way we want to, because it's not going to happen. Like, Adesanya wants to fight in Sydney, so UFC Africa is going to be put on the side right for now. It's just not going to happen with that particular fight, and that was the fight to make the debut at the Africa event, especially with Ngannou gone.
Good stuff. I just thought of a fight, non-title, where we all wrote off one athlete versus the other. Like, what are you doing? This person's going to get served up. And it was recent. It's so good that you're all going to be speechless, and the only thing you guys are going to do is give me a fist bump. Peter Yan against Sean O'Malley. Come on. None of us gave O'Malley a chance, right? And I feel like Dricus Du Plessis is Sean O'Malley, and look what happened. Just one fist bump. Right.
I gave you a half.
What's up with Danny? He doesn't like me today. He doesn't like my set. He's no fist bump. We got beef apparently. All right. Wait till Peru knocks out Colombia out of the next World Cup. All right, here we go with the additional.
That's deep. That hurt.